Hey guys, so we're just gonna get started and jump right into Max. This tutorial is gonna show you like how to open it, what the layout of the patch is, what a patch is, what the building blocks are of Max, and just kind of set the groundwork for how you interact with Max and how you get it up and going. And then the following tutorials will start to show you like some of the ways it behaves and what we can build with it. Yeah, so right off the back, like if I just open up the search bar on my computer and type in Max, it's an application. There's also Max 6 and Max 5. We're using Max 7 for this class, and I can go ahead and just open it. And you can see that I have it as my primary software here, and I can just go File, New Patcher. And a patcher is basically when we talk about coding in Max, we make things in a patch. It'll open up something like this. You have a little window here. I can double click onto that to make it full size. And yeah, it's probably a little different than most coding environments you're used to. That's because it's a data flow language. It's different than a sequential language. So for example, in Python, you type strings of code and it executes them in the order they're written. This is actually more freeform and graphical. So if I do a little walkthrough of like everything up here is kind of the building block. So we have the object, we have a message, we have a comment, toggle, and I'm just going to start right here. I'm going to click on object. You can see I get this little box with a blinking, like kind of like start typing here. Just very quickly, before I get too far into what all these different things are, I'm going to do a little walk around the park here and talk you through what's going on. I'm going to start zooming in just so that we can do that. Like you can see everything maybe in 300%. So this is where the zoom is. You could also do command plus or minus, and that'll let you zoom or zoom out. And over on the left, we can kind of ignore all this stuff for the moment being. There's a package manager, there's images, it's stuff that it's just kind of like you can access different parts of Max, but we don't need to get into that at the moment. Like I said, all the building blocks are up here. Anything has a little arrow below it shows even more building blocks. We're going to stick to the basics for the moment. Over on this side, the two most important things, the number one most important thing is the Max console, and that's going to be where we can print things to debug, or if an error is happening, it'll usually come up on the Max console. It'll try and tell us that something's not working. So that's good to have open while you're patching sometimes. The other thing is the inspector. We'll start to use this a little more later on, but just so you know, if I hover over something, it gives us like a bunch of options about maybe how it behaves, but also just like UI elements. Like if I wanted to, I could change the border color for that. And you don't have to mess with any of that. Just nice to know that that option is there, so you can kind of get your own look for things if you wanted to. And then down here, the two most important things at the moment, you could turn the grid on if you wanted. And that can be kind of nice to have things lined up. But actually the nicest reason to have the grid on is when you're using Max, you see how like we selected this object and I'm moving it around, I'm dragging it around. And then there's a lock icon here. Now the grid disappears and I can't drag anything around. You'll see that we're going to constantly be locking and unlocking the patch. So that when it's unlocked, we're kind of adding new things into it, we're writing stuff, and then once it's locked, usually we can interact with things and we're kind of like more performing with it. So yeah, you can also do command plus E, so you can lock and unlock that way. You can also just hold command and click on the background. So if I hold command and just click with the mouse, it's unlocking and locking it. So there's a couple of different options for that, but you can always just default to this lock icon down here. So right off the bat, we got kind of a lay of the land and everything here. I'm going to bring an object out And you can see it also says that the hotkey is N. So three things I can do. I can drag off, I can just click, or while the patch is unlocked, if I just type the letter N, as in never, it'll just automatically make a box for me, or an object, I should say. These are essentially the building blocks of Macs. They're like the literal code. Like they're gonna take information and they're gonna do something to that information. They're gonna return that information after it's processed in some way, or it's gonna give us information that we request. So right off the back, I could just type, and you see as I'm typing, it gives me a whole bunch of different things that could be filled in here. So it's kind of an autocomplete for it. I'm going to type random. It said generate a random number. That's a pretty basic programming tool that we've used in a lot of other languages. I'm going to hit enter. And right here we can see, if I hover over, we have these two inlets and this one outlet. And if I actually click and pull, you can see that now I have this little patch cord coming out of it. I could also do a top patch cord coming into it. And really what happens a lot in Macs is information comes in through this first inlet, and then new information that's related to that information in some way comes out of this outlet here. And it just, you're going to feed one thing into the next, into the next, and the next, and we can do that with video information, we can do that with audio information, we can do that with strings, we can do that with integers and floats. And each of these objects has their own behavior. And one thing that's nice is if I right-click on it, and I can say open random help, and it'll show me exactly how that object behaves with this little help file. And each object has its own help file. I could unlock it. I could literally just copy-paste that whole thing and bring it into my... I don't recommend copy-pasting everything because you're not going to learn as well doing it that way. But that option is there for you. There's three things we need right now. We need to tell it that we want a random number. We need to be able to see that random number. And we need to tell this object what range of randomness we want. It's like, do I want a number between 0 and 10, 0 and 100? Let's start with that. So with random, a lot of times objects require arguments. They have attributes of like how they behave, and those attributes need some kind of argument to tell it like this is how you're going to behave. And random's attribute is pretty specific. It's supposed to give a random number, but we need to give an argument of what range it should be. So if I type 10 after random, it's basically me saying there is a random object with a range of 10. And it knows that that 10 that's typed after it is referring to the range. So now I should get a number between actually 0 and 9. Because it'll start at 0 and it'll give us 10 different it'll count up from there. So we get a range of 0 to 9, that's 10. A range of 10. And what I need to do is I need to tell it to give us a random number. I'm going to drag off of here. It says button. This is called a bang. I'm just making comments with a hotkey. These don't affect the code at all. They're just a way of like saying things. And bang is a kind of a tricky thing. It's like the lifeblood of Macs. It's like basically saying go do this. There's not a great equivalent to it. But random is expecting a bang. You can see this first inlet, it says causes random number output. And we can feed a bang to it to say cause that random number output. So I'm literally taking the output and hooking it up to the input here. And that bang is going to travel down this cord into here, and this random object is going to go, oh, that's what I was expecting. So now I got to give you a random number. And that random number is going to come out of here. But we need a way to visualize that random number so we can see, because right now nothing is hooked up to it. We can do that a couple of different ways. I have an object I'm pulling off here, and I can type print. And print is another type of object, and it's pretty self-explanatory. In fact, it only has one inlet, and it says anything to be printed to the Macs window. Perfect. So if I hook those up, and I open up the Macs window here, another thing you could do is you can go to Window, Macs Console, and I could have a free-floating console window if I wanted. I'll just do it this one right now. And if I lock the patch, this bang is, you're able to interact with it. If I click on it, now that bang travels down, tells random, give me a random number. It says okay, and that number comes out of here and it goes to print, and it's printed right there, and we got a 1. And if I click it again, we got a 5, and a 9, and a 5, and a 1, and a 0, and a 5, and an 8. And that's kind of the core crux of Macs, is you tell it you want something to come out of here, it gets processed, or it interprets that in some way, and it continues to pass it along. The other thing I could do in terms of displaying the information is we have like a number box here. And this is basically just a way to visualize in the patch what's coming in through that bang. So now you can see it's both being printed at the same time as it's being displayed here. And you can have as many of these outlets as you want. There's no limit to like how many different chains or flows that like information can come through and go to different areas. So it doesn't have to be all the way down like one straight line. You can have the information branch out to many different areas. And I can also use this actually to create numbers. If I type a number, if I lock the patch, and I type 40 or 20, or I can right now I'm just grabbing it and going up and down. And that number is going to come out of this outlet. You'll notice if we go back to the random object here, if I look at that first inlet, it says causes random number output. But if I were on the right here, it says set the random number range. And we did that already with this 10. But that's kind of a way of like hard coding it so that when you open the patch, it knows right away, like, I'm going to give you a random number between 0 and 9. But while we're performing or while we're using our patch, we might want to try some other numbers. And I could do that by going in here, typing 100, locking it, and then I get 100 possible values. But if I want to change it, then I have to unlock it, and I have to type another number, and I have to go back and lock it. And that's not very conducive to performing. So what they give us is an option where we can just hook something into this inlet here, and we can override this number. And I'm going to do that with this integer box right here. I'm going to take the outlet of it and hook it in here. And one thing that's important that gets glossed over a little on Macs at the beginning is you can notice that this is a blue inlet and this is an orange inlet. This is referring to hot and cold inlets. Hot inlet, orange, is always going to trigger an output. Let me clean this up a little. And cold inlet is going to set or store info with no output. So if I lock the patch here and I type 40, nothing really happens. But what something is actually happening, we just have this cold inlet here where it's saying, all right, I've received that information. Now instead of a 10, I have a range of 40. But I'm not going to send anything out. I'm just holding on to that information now until I receive something in a hot inlet. And we go back to our bang here, and now we have a number that's coming out that's a range of 40. So basically, anytime anything's received in a hot inlet, it's going to trigger something happening and returning some information. But anytime anything comes in a cold inlet, it's going to just hang tight until it receives something in a hot inlet. Let's see if, and here's, I can go over the inspector, and I can just change the font size down a little so we can keep this here but not have it take up as much space. And that's kind of, yeah, if I'm making all these comments with a little comment box, I can drag that out and then like remember to do this. I can leave comments for myself or for someone else that opens the patch. So there's some other objects here that messages we'll get into a little more, but messages are, they look like objects, but they're actually just pieces of data and information that we can put into a message in order to communicate with an object in some way. So like I can type 13 into here. I can type boo. I can type 2 pieces of information, boo 13. Now we have a list. And I could take this outlet and I could, let's say I change this to 5,000. I lock it. And now I have a range of 5,000. But it's not like a number box where I can scroll up and down through it. It's literally just a button now that I can hit. And almost everything is a message. I could just print straight to the message. I could like hook this up, open up my print window, and I can clear it right here. Okay, boo 13, and it'll print that message out there. And generally, what we use messages for is if we want to hard code some kind of button of a value. It's also a way to send information to objects to tell it how to behave. We talked about having attributes. We'll get into that more in another one. But everything kind of comes down to a message. I know this object right here, it looks like it's a special kind of thing, but I can actually make a message box. And one thing that's nice about message boxes is this write inlet. It basically will display any information that's coming through it, and it'll just show it in this message box. So it's great for debugging, and if I give it a bang, it's literally just a message that says bang. This is just a UI version of this exact same thing. So if these are equal to each other. This just happens to be a user interface version of this message. And we can see that if I take this bang and I send it to the random object, it behaves exactly the same way. I'm going to make another object really quick just to give you an idea of something else. There's one called metro. And you're going to use this object a lot. And it expects an argument afterwards that's how, so basically metro is short for metronome. It's it sends out a bang, but it sends out a bang at a specific interval. And that interval, or how often it does, is what it expects as an argument right here. So I'll say 1,000. It's in milliseconds. So this object is saying is every 1,000 milliseconds, send out a bang. Because I get tired of hitting this every time. I want the computer to do it for me. And rather than receiving a bang, what it's expecting is an on or an off state. You can turn this metro on or off. And that we can use an object called toggle. And toggle is a UI object that will send a 0 or a 1. And I'll grab another integer box. No, I grab a bang here. And if I lock the patch, I can turn the toggle on. And that metro receives that as a value of 1. It says, oh, I need to be turned on. And now every 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second, a bang comes out. And I can turn that off. And again, here's a message. Sorry, I'll just drag it off of here so you see where I'm coming. We have a message box here. I'm going to take that toggle and I'm going to hook it up to this inlet so I can see what information is coming out. And you can see that it's literally just a UI object for 0 and 1. It's just so common in Macs to send a 0 or 1 as an on or an off that they made this kind of UI object to make things a little quicker and a little more responsive. So I could also just make a 0 and a 1 message. I can turn it on, turn it off, and I could take this metro and I could, I'll just keep that there so you can see, I could output a random number every 1,000 milliseconds. And, whoops, sorry, wrong button. Much like I was able to change the range of the random value in here, I can change the speed right here. And I know that because if I hover over, it says set metronome time interval. And now I could change this to 100. And now we're getting a random value or a bang that's sent to the random value every 1/10 of a second, so 10 times a second. And yeah, so basically you have objects, You have these UI objects that send out bangs or zeros and ones. We have number boxes. We have messages. We have comments. And all of these kind of come together to make a patch. So we're going to use the following tutorials after this to kind of explain more in depth like how we start to build things and what the order of operations are, what the data types are. And then we'll end with making a random player piano. We can start to explore like how we can get some performativity out of Max.